Welcome to 5 Minutes of Torah with the BI Rabbi. I'm your BI Rabbi, Rabbi Adam Stein, for today. We've entered a challenging time in the Jewish calendar, with Tisha B'Av coming up in just a few days. It's a time of great mourning throughout the world Jewish community. Mourning for the two temples and other calamities in our history that are commemorated on Tisha B'Av. And by the way, I do hope you'll join us this coming Monday evening for Tisha B'Av commemoration and service. It starts at 8:15 here at Beth Israel. We're doing it this year in conjunction with our sister conservative congregations in the Vancouver mainland area, in West Vancouver, Harel, and in Richmond, Beth Tikva. And it should be a very, very meaningful program and service. It's also a great way to meet the two new rabbis at those congregations, Rabbi Adam Rubin in Richmond and Rabbi Philip Gibbs in West Vancouver. This year, in addition to mourning for those traditional calamities of Tisha B'Av, the Crusades, the expulsion of Jews from Spain, the temples being destroyed, etc., we're also in mourning for the killing and the violence that we've seen in Jerusalem in the past few weeks, and the three members of the family in Halamish who were killed in their home in Shabbat last week. You'll hear me speak about those this Friday night, tonight, if you're at shul. It's also not a very happy time in the Haftarah cycle. We have these three very dark Haftarot, sections from the prophets, in the three Shabbatot leading up to Tisha B'Av, this week hearing of Isaiah's vision of the destruction of the temple. But thankfully, we're at an auspicious time in the Torah reading cycle itself. This week we start the book of Deuteronomy, or Devarim in Hebrew. So the Hebrew name Devarim is derived from the ancient practice of naming books or even Torah portions after the first word or phrase, or the first significant word or phrase in that book or Torah portion. In this case, it's Eile HaDevarim. These are the words. Starts off the Torah portion and the book itself. Now, we couldn't name the book Eile, which just means these. It's not very significant. So we name it Devarim. And there's actually another Hebrew name to this book, one used frequently in rabbinic literature. That one is Mishneh Torah, the repetition of the Torah, literally, since it's mostly composed of three long speeches by Moses, towards the end of his life, in which he reviews most of the rest of the Torah, especially the Exodus. Now, the Mishneh Torah, you might recognize, is also the name of Maimonides, or Rambam's master work of Jewish law, in which he organized Jewish law, halakha, into easy-to-understand categories and subcategories. The name Mishneh Torah is translated into Greek by Philo in the Septuagint, where it's pronounced Deuteronomion. That's hard to pronounce. And it got translated into Latin and later into English, and we get Deuteronomy. So Moses starts this repetition of the Torah in his first big speech of this book by saying, Adonai Eloheinu diber eleinu bechorev lemor Rav lachem shevet bahar Sinai. Adonai, our God, spoke to us at Horeb, at Sinai, saying, enough for you staying at this mountain. Basically, you've been here long enough, get going. So I want to speak briefly, before I wrap up, about the text right before Moses' first statement. In the Torah, in verse 5, it says, Be'ever hayarden be'eretz Moav, ho'il Moshe be'er et haTorah hazot. On the other side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to explain this teaching. What does it mean, haTorah hazot, this teaching? That translation, this teaching, is from the Jewish Publication Society, which has become a very widely used translation. It's used in our Chumash, in the Reform Movement's Chumash, and it's very well regarded by great scholars. But the Shockin Books translation, called The Five Books of Moses by Everett Fox, says Moses set about to explain this instruction, translating Torah as instruction instead of teaching. Well, they're similar words. The King James translation, very famous for 400 years in the English-speaking world, goes further and says, on this side of the Jordan, the land of Moab, began Moses to declare this law. Law, teaching, instruction, they're all slightly different. We can see in this one sentence here, as we see in almost every verse in the Torah, there are many ways to translate or interpret every verse. And as the saying goes, every translation is actually an interpretation. It's almost impossible to get a translation that's simply a word-for-word translation of something without the interpreter bringing some of his or her own decisions or opinion into the translating. So the Sfat Emet, Yehuda Aryeh Leib of Ger, in the 19th century, teaches that Moses interpreted the Torah in many languages, so that future generations of Jews in many lands would have access to the Torah in a language and terms they could understand. Rabbi Harold Kushner, the editor of part of the commentary on our movement's Etz Chaim Chumash, and a well-known rabbi of the 20th century and up until now, he explains that there's holiness in the Hebrew language, the holy tongue, Lashon HaKodesh, and it's holiness in and of itself. It is also necessary, though, for people to learn what God requires of them in a language that they can understand. And so it is today. We revere and value the Hebrew language and pray and study it as much as possible, even speak it as a native tongue in our homeland, the state of Israel. But we realize that in our time and the time of the Talmud and in the time of medieval rabbis, many Jews do not speak and did not speak or understand Hebrew. And it's important to make our tradition as accessible as we can in whatever way we can. Shabbat Shalom.